Every dynasty and empire in history has been founded, defended, and expanded through the use of military power. Military strength, fortitude, discipline, and growth was essential to the preservation of any nation at any point in time. And though today we like to preach of make love not war, it was through warriors that we even have the freedom to spout such idiocy. As the ancient Chinese knew, if you wish to create a lasting peace, you must be prepared to fight for it. But to fight for it, you need soldiers. And not just any soldiers, but elites. Highly trained vanguards, bred for war and combat. Such is the case with the Tiandi of For Honor. But who were the Tiandi in history? What were they based on? Are they just generic Chinese soldiers? Or is there a bit more to them? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Heroes in History, where we take a look at all of For Honor's warriors and determine who they are most likely based on and whether or not they do their counterparts justice. Today, we're talking about the vanguard of the Wulin, the Tiandi. Firstly, who are the Tiandi in game? Well, the truly sad fact about the Wulin and For Honor is that very little was done to establish lore or background information about them. Their name literally means heaven and earth, and according to the wiki, it's symbolic of their decision to serve a lord or master for the rest of their days. Supposedly, the Tiandi were bodyguards and defenders of emperors, kings, and queens, and their name is symbolic of their oath to serve in death and in life. Well, to be fair, that's more than we were given for Nusya at any rate. The Tiandi are armed with Dao swords, metal armor, and they fight with a martial arts style that looks suspiciously like Long Fist Kung Fu or Chong Quan. They are portrayed as highly trained and disciplined warriors with a flair for the dramatic, as well as a slight superiority complex, as demonstrated in some of their executions and emotes. They are also dodge specialists, never standing in one place for very long and practicing maneuverability over solid strength. So, does any of this have a historical equivalent? Well, there were two major clues that the Tiandi provided to help me make this determination. The Tiandi are supposedly guards and royal protectors. This means they are likely Imperial Guards of some kind. But this doesn't narrow it down entirely, as various dynasties had their own specialized guards, such as the Jinyi Wei, which we discussed during the Zanhu video. So, what was the other clue? The armor worn by the Tiandi, while covered in fantasy elements, is familiar. The armor looks to be inspired by cord and plaque armor and Mingguang armor. This kind of armor first was developed during the Sui Dynasty, but became far more popular during the Tang Dynasty. Now, given what we know about the fact that the Tiandi are meant to be elite guards or officers, and they wear armor of the Sui or Tang Dynasty, that really helps narrow it down. I am of the opinion that the Tiandi are based on the elite guards and officers of the Tang Emperor. They were originally called the Jinjun, or Forbidden Troops, and would come to be called the Long Wu, or War Dragons. And I think the term dragon sounds a little familiar, since most of Tiandi's moves reference either tiger or dragon. Now, to explain this comparison, we need to explain the military system of the Tang Dynasty. The Sui Dynasty, which came before it, was a very short-lived one, only lasting through 2 emperors, and the second of the 2 was a pretty bad one. In 617 AD, Li Yuan led a rebellion to overthrow the Sui and take control, along with his son, Li Shimin, and his daughter, Ping Yang. His campaign was successful, but the fighting was not over, as with the fall of Sui, there would be many warlords seeking to challenge him for power and control of this new era of history. However, Li Yuan had a contingency plan. For one thing, he had rallied allies from the Turks and Afghans as cavalry, a form of military strength that China was lacking prior. With the use of experienced cavalry, Li Yuan was able to help secure his holding on China's northern regions near the steppe. In fact, the Turkish nomads came to call Li Yuan the Tian Khan, or Heavenly Khan. See the little name hint there, Tian? See that? When Li Yuan had finally seized power and defeated his rivals, he had in his command over 200,000 loyal soldiers, but 30,000 of those soldiers volunteered to remain in his service after the general demobilization. These soldiers became known as the Yuan Chong Jinjun, or the Pioneer Forbidden Guard. These soldiers were kept in garrisons around the royal palace and territories. However, despite these soldiers being loyal and skilled, they were not the primary military force of the Tang Dynasty in its early period. The Tang Dynasty re-implemented a military system called the Fu Bing system. In this system, the emperor gives allotted land to farmers and peasants in specific territories where they could care for themselves and their families, but in exchange, they would agree to an allotted time of military service for certain intervals throughout the year. In this way, the military would be made up of citizen soldiers, as the emperor was afraid that a professional or highly skilled military would inevitably start becoming power-hungry. That was his big fear. By ensuring the military were peasants who benefited from the government's generosity, they'd be a lot less likely to fight back or get any personal ideas of gaining power. He also made sure to plant a lot of their farms and homesteads near the steppe itself, so that during his campaigns into northern territory to increase his hold of the empire, he already had soldiers based there who could get to the battlefield very quickly. However, it would be necessary eventually to have professionals in the army to act as officers to oversee the training of the peasants, conscripting them, dealing out discipline, checking in on the citizen soldiers when they were living or when they were late reporting in. These officers were usually members of the forbidden troops and were recognized by their specialized armor, which was usually identified as the cord and plaque armor. For the early years of the dynasty, this system was useful, and the forbidden troops were a very effective fighting force, but also very exclusive. Admission into the forbidden troops involved choosing soldiers who not only had a unique set of skills and strengths, but in some cases, even had to look good enough. The emperor wanted soldiers who were somewhat handsome or imposing to make a statement. However, over time, induction criteria became more lax and revolved more around favor and bribery. This led to a slight problem: nepotism and noble bias. Many noble families and officials in the empire managed to encourage the recruitment of their own sons into the troops, which allowed for more favor and influence in political and imperial matters. As this problem grew, later emperors decided it would be best to curtail this to a degree, as they were afraid the guard would become the real rulers of the palace, not unlike the Praetorian Guard in Rome, so they tried to become more strict on recruitment criteria again. However, as time went on, the status of being a royal guard changed a great deal. In 662 AD, for example, the emperor moved some Fubing military horsemen, footmen, and archers into a unit called the Yulin, or Feathered Forest Unit, and had them act alongside the imperial guards at the palace to look more imposing and to add a sense of camaraderie between the Fubing citizen soldiers and the elite officers. This didn't sit well with the nobles who had been specifically chosen to be involved in the Forbidden Troops unit. It's kind of like saying, we're the elites, but you just put these peasants next to us like we're of the same class. We don't like that, you specifically chose us. They didn't like it very much. And later on, a cavalry unit called the 100 Riders Unit was increased to the 1,000 Riders Unit by Empress Wu Zetian, and then increased again to the 10,000 Riders by Emperor Songdong. They were instrumental in 710 AD during the battle with Empress Wei's forces, and were renamed the Long Wu, or Martial Dragons. In later years, only pioneers of the original Forbidden Troops were selected to become Long Wu, so the Forbidden Troops, the original Imperial Guards, were slowly dissolving and remade into the Long Wu. See, we finally got to the dragons there. Unfortunately, as we draw closer to the middle years of the dynasty, we begin to see the military of the Tang Dynasty. It's all harsh change that would start to spell the end of the dynasty. Firstly was the dismantling of the Fubing system. The later emperors began to phase out the citizen soldier ideal to increase the number of trained and skilled military warriors for longer campaigns. After all, the Fubing system was most useful for short campaigns designed to deal with closer internal conflicts, not for long drawn-out wars. And Empress Wu Zetian demonstrated through her campaigns against northern Korea that while a great military tactician though she was, she lacked the manpower and military strength to fully overpower her enemy. Clearly, if they were to expand any further, a stronger military was needed. But with the creation of strong military bodies meant that the military began to overpower the reigning government. In time, strong militarists and generals began to undermine the central government of the Tang. Not only this, but the Imperial Guard was certainly not what it used to be. While the Long Wu were still active, they were now not the only Imperial Guard unit in service, and not all had unwavering loyalty. The value and prestige that came with the position had waned to a certain degree. By 755 AD, only 1,000 Imperial Guard units were in service, and while that may seem like a lot, keep in mind that far more than that were expected to be in service when escorting the emperor from one place to another. In 757 AD, when Li Heng became emperor, he rallied up his own Imperial Guards called the Shen Wu, or Divine Martial Guards. However, he had so few officials and specialized soldiers willing to serve under him that he had to lower the recruitment regulations, letting in lesser trained and lesser desired people. But the final change of the Imperial Guard would be in the Anxi Rebellion, when the Imperial Guard was replaced by the Xinchi Army, also known as the Divine Stratagem Army. They were originally just a military unit, but they had been so useful in the retaking of Chang'an in 763 AD that they were reallocated to be a unit of the Imperial Guard, and they were given such privilege and favor and special treatment that many other soldiers and guard units abandoned their current station to join the Xinchi. This phasing out almost all other guard units and the original pioneers and their offspring, who still clung to the old titles of Forbidden Truths or Long Wu, were almost all but forgotten. Soon, they just died out, and it was left with just the Xinchi. Unfortunately, the Xinchi would become the puppets of the eunuchs of the imperial court, who they used to bully the emperors into doing what they wanted. They became nothing more than the bullies and thugs of the capital, and the standard and quality of the Tang military fell into depravity, to the point that they were unable to withstand the Huang Chao in 880 AD. The Imperial Guard officially came to an end with the death of the Tang Dynasty in 903 AD. The legacy of the Tang Dynasty Imperial Guard would be one of tragedy, beginning with promise, fortune, and honor, carrying the weight of both nobility, status, and a little bit of skill, to become a faded bygone and lost ideal in an ever-changing world where modernity and assimilation become the norm. In an attempt to build a stronger military, the true martial heroes of the empire would be lost in a sea of ruffians and brutes who would end up becoming the very thing that they were founded to stand against. Thus, the Imperial Guard's legacy is one of valor and sadness. It's ironic. The Imperial Guard was established along with a system of military governing that would prevent this very thing from happening. And yet, over time, laziness, ease, and financial ideals rose up to overpower that original ideal. But what does the Tiandi have to do with any of this? Well, the first obvious clue is in the armor. The armor, though fantasy in many aspects, does look similar to the cord and plaque armor used by the Tang Dynasty Imperial Guards. Their sword is a dao, and the primary weapon of the Tang military was a dao sword called the Tang Dao, which, okay, while a little thinner than what the Tiandi wields, is still a dao. The name Tiandi is also very fitting, as it was common practice to make clay or terracotta guards to defend dead emperors throughout China's history, not just during the Tang Dynasty, but since its beginning. So they would defend their masters on earth and in heaven. So the Tiandi, meaning heaven and earth, is a very fitting name for an Imperial Guard regiment. Then there's the martial arts. While not strictly one style, the For Honor wiki claims that Tiandi's fighting style was heavily inspired from Changquan, or long fist style of Kung Fu, a style of Kung Fu originated in northern China. Long fist isn't a single style either, but refers to a family of martial arts with similar principles. The basic concept is to use long-reaching strikes that fully extend the body's limbs to execute powerful strikes from range. And if you watch any of Tiandi's fighting style, you'll notice he always fully extends his limbs in any attack. His dragon palm strike, his strong dragon kick, his basic light and heavy attacks, all of them involve him fully extending his arms or legs for the strike. Now, why does this matter? Because most of the subtypes of the long fist, like Cha Yuan Yi, Huan Quan, and Pao Chui, were developed during the Tang or at least Sui dynasty, meaning the Imperial Guard likely had some schooling in the art form. Also, the Dao sword is a sword used in the art form as well. In fact, in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Avatar: The Legend of Korra, some firebending techniques have moves modeled after Changquan techniques, and Zuko, one of the big characters, is shown to use Dao swords in the show. The screaming that people make fun of Tiandi for isn't an accident either. In Kung Fu styles, it's taught often to scream or shout when doing certain moves, as the shouting expels air from the body, tightening the diaphragm and hardening muscle. It also encourages yourself to hit harder and with more force, as well as intimidating the enemy. As an Imperial Guard soldier, one had to appear intimidating and be powerful, so a war cry wouldn't be an unlikely thing in the day-to-day training or battle scenario. Honor and duty go hand in hand for many warriors. Without duty, how can you show honor? And without honor, how can you do your duty? It's easy to forget that the greatest of warriors were the ones who would not stand the test of time, because their duty could not match their honor. They eventually just fade with time, like the forbidden troops of the Tang Dynasty. The desire for easy assurances, the chance to take an easier path, the call of modern innovation and progress, all these things slowly lead to the demise of the once proud dragons who defended the Tang emperors, in place of common thugs who couldn't stop the fall of their own dynasty. But the dragons are not dead. Even today, there are warriors who would hold their duty to their country, their people, and their spiritual powers far higher than any amount of money or material gain. And on the field of battle, where victory hangs in the balance, you can ask for no better warrior than one whose honor holds true on earth and in heaven. And that is the promise of Tiandi. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Take care.
You lost Zone A. Kill me or release me, parasite. Be gone! Hut! So, we meet again for the last time! Be gone, son! This mustn't register on an emotional level. First, distract target. Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek. Dazed, will attempt wild haymaker. Employ elbow block. Block furrow left. Weaken right jaw. Now fracture. Summary: ears ringing, jaw fractured, 3 ribs cracked, 4 broken, diaphragm hemorrhaging. Physical recovery 6 weeks. Full psychological recovery 6 months. Capacity to spit it back of head neutralized.
You captured Zone A.
Discombobulate.